Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. Now, here are your hosts, John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
All right, welcome into the Mental Advantage Podcast. Well, Brandon, it's not every day that I can say we are going to have a professional golfer on the show tonight and a Navy SEAL, and they're the same person.
I was going to say, I don't know of anyone else that could make that claim.
Right, exactly. Some of them probably feel like they're going through buds training when they're out on the course, but those
sure
guys that have actually done it.
There are probably a lot of SEALs that are very proficient with a club, but right. I don't know that there's anybody quite like Chad Metcalf.
Absolutely. So for the listeners, Chad Metcalf is a former professional golfer, former Navy SEAL, who's also the author of a book, Young Athlete's Ultimate Guide to Mental Toughness, and the co-author of a book with his wife that is called The Teen Confidence Unlocked. And really just, digs into so many different things in this episode. He talks a lot about what prompted, how he got through buds training. He gives one of the best quotes. I wrote it down about, the SEALs. I'm not even going to give it away. I'm just going to, you'll have to hear it when it comes by. But it had to do with training and just a mindset he took to get through training. And then he talks about, just some of the application of those same mental skills as he was, trying to find his way through Q school and get on the PGA Tour. And it's a really fascinating journey that he takes us on with some of the lessons that he learned, and then how he's now applying that to teams he's coaching, and also many young athletes in this Ultimate Guide to Mental Toughness book.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, he's really impressive. What I love about guys like Chad is that, they don't just embrace difficulty or the suck or, the suffering that goes along with, becoming a SEAL, or really the suffering and struggle that goes along with doing anything great. And, the one thing that you hear is that, yes, there were difficult times for Chad. There were failures. There were obstacles that we all face, but it's the guys like Chad that you can look to and learn from on being present, accept where you're at, learn from it. We always use that word failure, but at the end of the day, it really isn't a failure. And this is going to sound really cliche, but it really isn't a failure if you can learn something. And I think that's the one thing that's really impressive, is that Chad has the ability, and he talks about it in the book, right, is the ability to assess, and the ability to really realize, here's where I am at right now. What is my next step? And not what's 3 steps. What is my next step? And I think that's the reason, he made it through buds. It's the reason, he made it home from all of his deployments and was able to then, do some really successful stuff. And I think he's doing a tremendous job getting content and helping the youth, and not just youth, but people in general with mindset and where they need to be.
And you hit on it, Brandon, is figuring it out. Here's a guy that when he went through Bud's training, he was 135 pounds, had never run further than a mile and a half. And get this, never been in the ocean. He'd never been in the ocean. And now, hey, why not go become a Navy SEAL? And, he talks in the book, and I've heard him talk about this in other forums about, his goal the whole time was he didn't look at Bud's school as an obstacle. He just knew it was going to, as you mentioned earlier, it was going to suck, and you just got to embrace the suck. And the other thing I think that the listeners will benefit from taking from this is the vulnerability it takes to say, okay, I've tried this a few different times. I don't have the answer now, but instead of continuing to hit my head against the wall here, let me ask somebody who does know how to figure it out, or let me lean on somebody. And so that's a really, really tough thing. And, he's even said it before, like that's not easy for Navy SEALs by nature to do that and be that vulnerable to ask that. And speaking of which, stick around at the end of this episode, towards the end of this episode, there's one final question that is asked that it will be well worth the wait. Hopefully you always stick around to the end of the episodes, but this one today, Brandon, is
John, way to make sure that everybody skips to about the 55-minute mark. But I think, real quick I think what you bring up is a great point. And I think we as, just human beings, humility is a very difficult thing for most people. And certainly for at least early on, for high achievers, because there's this idea today that we should all be subject matter experts. And I think, it's really prevalent in teens. And I know that's part of what, with his book, where that focus group is, but, he mentions about, being coachable, and being coachable and being humble go hand in hand. And I think that most teens and most folks, as they're growing up, they go through that phase where they know everything. And I think the ones that realize faster than the others that, hey, not only do I not know everything, but there are people within my sphere of influence. They may have the answers to the tests that I'm taking. I just really have to ask. And I think when you get to that point, you want to talk about being unstoppable, man. Being humble and being willing to be coached and learn. That's you can get somewhere if you're that way. And Chad's done that for sure.
Awesome. Very well said. Well, guys, get your pen and paper ready, because here is Chad Metcalf. All right. Well, here he is, Chad Metcalf. You heard it there in the introduction. And man, Chad, first of all, thank you for joining us. We are so fired up for this conversation tonight. It's I am really looking forward to it.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So let's start with, because I think we were talking a little bit there before we got recording, is I think your story is just so fascinating on a bunch of different levels, but I would be remiss if we ever had a interview with you and we didn't get into some of your background as far as the Navy SEAL thing. I mean, the audience heard there in the intro, professional golfer, Navy SEAL. Let's talk a little bit before we get going anywhere down too far down the road, is just how your journey got started and how you ended up in the military.
So, I mean, I grew up, I played a lot of sports when I was growing up. But, my parents were always like, you can play kind of whatever sport you want except football. My mom wouldn't let me play football, or do karate. I don't know why. It's like, you're going to get hurt. Which, kind of.
Yeah, irony.
You kind of blew
right?
that one out of the water, right?
Kind of funny how that one turned out. So, I mean, I did, I played baseball. Like I was a gymnast, like in my younger years. I got pretty good at that. I think I can still do a standing backflip. I freaking hurt my knee.
Wow.
a while ago. I could do one as of July, and then I popped my other knee, but like they're feeling pretty good. I've been rehabbing them, so I'm like, all right, I think I got it again. So give me a week, I might try it again. But like played baseball, all those kind of sports, and then when I was about 13, my great grandpa, he was a farmer in West Texas, and went out there and he had like some golf clubs in his garage, and they're like old ones with like leather grips, persimmon head woods. All that kind of stuff. I still got the set.
Wow.
They might have been like predated, like Ben Hogan.
Right.
That's how old they are. I'm like, oh, Pawpaw, what's these? He's like, oh, freaking take them. Here's some golf balls. Just go hit them in the field. And I'm like, okay, cool. So like the whole time we were there, I'm just like hitting golf balls in the field and, digging around in barns and, think kids do. When we left, he's like, came and stuck them in the car. And he's like, hey, just take these with you. So took them home, and there was a field by our house, and I just kind of hit golf balls out there and, went to the library, got a book. It was like right before Tiger had won the Masters. And I'm like reading this on like, oh, this is the grip and so I use swing and all that stuff. So started playing. Then I realized there was a golf course, not far from my house. Like if you drove there, it was like a 5-minute drive. But if I rode my bike, I could like cut through the woods, go through like a little creek, and then like cut over to the golf course. But I didn't really have any money. So I was like, hey, and I homeschooled, so I couldn't be on like the school golf team or whatever.
Right.
But I was like, hey, if I like wash golf carts, can I just play golf? And they were like, yeah, sure, man, knock yourself out. So like rain or shine, I'd be out there, and it was, I read a book about Tiger Woods. He's like, oh, it was raining. So if it was raining, I'd go play because I had to get ready for like the Open, right? So like this one day, it was like monsooning, like no one's playing golf. There wasn't any lightning. I called. I was like, "Is the course open?" They're like, "Hey, you can go play if you want to." So I went and did. I was like, by the third hole, clubs are just flying out of my hand. But anyway, did that for a while. Then I got a job at a pretty nice golf course in Austin when I could drive, and like I'd knock out my schoolwork in like 2 or 3 hours. And then especially like during the summers, I'd be there from like sun up to sundown. Wow. Practicing. I was planning on like going to play college golf, like try to walk on somewhere, play junior stuff. And that was kind of like the path I was on. And then 9/11 hit, and I was actually working at the golf course that morning, like pulling out the golf carts. And they said, hey, you got to come in here and look at this.
Wow.
And, went in there, and, the first plane had already hit the towers, and then I watched the second plane fly into it. And like at that moment, like golf just didn't seem that important. Mm-hmm. So I went to the Navy recruiting office pretty shortly after that. Again, that was like 20 something years ago.
And how old are you at this point, Chad? Are you 18, 19?
I was 18.
You were 18. Okay.
Yeah, I was 18. Went in the Navy recruiting office. Again, I didn't know anything about the military. Mm-hmm. Right. I'm like, well, I think Navy SEALs are cool. I've seen like Charlie Sheen.
Yeah.
That looked kind of cool. So I was like, I don't know. Like, I think I want to be a SEAL. And the recruiter was like 50 pounds overweight. He's like, oh yeah, I've worked with SEALs. And I'm thinking, if this guy's worked with SEALs, they can't be that good. So I go next door,
throwing the ball to them and let them bounce it on their nose.
Yeah. I'm like, maybe that's not it. So I go next door to the Marine Corps office, and these dudes, I'm like, all right, these dudes can kick my ass. Look at them like, y'all got anything like SEALs? They're like, oh, we got Force Recon. It's better. And I was like, all right, sign me up. So I signed up. Like I went to MEPS, took the ASVAB, did all that to join the Marine Corps. Okay. End up getting denied.
Oh no.
Right. I'd broken my arm when I was like 13, mm-hmm. like walking across the top of our 6-foot fence, like pulling my little brother up, and there's like a limb, and I put my hand on it on one hand to brace myself and grabbed him with the other hand. Well, the branch snapped and I fell like straight up my arm, and my arm was like an L. Like, oh, right. So anyway, they put like a titanium plate in there, and whatever. Like I could still walk like 50 yards on a handstand, and they're like, well, your arm won't hold up during boot camp. So they disqualified me, not just from the Marine Corps, but disqualified me from every branch.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they're like, okay. I'm like, well, what can I do? And they're like, well, you could wait like 18 to 24 months or something and apply for a waiver. Right. Because like 9/11 had just happened. So like the global war on terror wasn't huge, and like recruiting restrictions were still under like the like when we weren't at war kind of deal.
Yeah.
So I went to college, like Austin Community College, and ended up dropping out, right? Like I couldn't like get out of bed to go to like an 8 a.m. math class. And math's like my best subject, but it was like, I couldn't get out of bed and go do it. So I just like dropped out of college. It's funny, it's like 2 years later, I was a SEAL, right? So, dropped out of college, worked odd jobs. Like I was still worked at the golf course. I was a waiter. I was a handyman at a ranch. I'm not really sure why you hire like an 18-year-old kid who doesn't know anything to be a handyman. Looking back, like now, I'm like, now it would make sense. But then, I'm like,
what's wrong with those people? Yeah.
Nobody wanted the job, I guess. But then I started working with a buddy of mine and his dad. He had a power washing business, right? And it was like we went and cleaned. I mean, we cleaned like football stadiums, like gas station parking, like where the people park to fill up with gas. Like we cleaned those. But the big thing we did was like commercial kitchens. Okay. So like we cleaned all like the McDonald's between Austin and San Antonio, like Chinese food restaurants, Furs, all that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I haven't eaten at a McDonald's in over 20 years.
Is that right? After doing
Since that day.
Yeah. But you go in there and you pull out the filters above the grease trap and you like spray those off and you clean the whole like ductwork and all that. I mean, it's like, what is it? Mike Rowe, Dirty Jobs.
Yeah, there you go.
So we're doing that. And I'm like a 18, 19-year-old kid making like $25 an hour back. I mean, this is like 20
good money back then. Yeah.
So I don't know where all the money went, but I was like crushing it. Right. I don't know what I was spending it on.
Yeah.
But, anyway, we were working late one night and we had to drive to like South Texas to an Air Force base to like clean their stuff. And we'd work till like 3 a.m. We got up at like 8 a.m. and we're driving. I fell asleep at the wheel, hit an 18-wheeler head on.
Oh,
and I woke up in a life flight helicopter, right? Like the truck had flipped, it had dragged. Like you can kind of see the scar on my head still. I've actually got a video that'll come out on YouTube tomorrow that's got some of the pictures. My mom was a big scrapbooker, so I have pictures of everything.
Oh, wow.
Including me all mangled.
Right.
But, that happened. Like, fortunately, like no one was killed in the accident. And like I walked out of the hospital the next day, like with road rash and a headache. Within a month from that, I figured out how to get a waiver and enlisted in the Navy with a SEAL Challenge contract. And when I walked in the recruiting office, they were like, holy crap, what happened to you? And I was like, oh, I was on my 4-wheeler and a branch hit me in the face. They're like, oh, it sounds good. Sign here. So did that, shipped off to Buds. Like, I mean, back then it was easier to get a SEAL contract, right? You just kind of had to say, yeah, I want to do that. And you could get a contract, right?
Okay. Is that right? Yeah.
Nowadays you've got to cause I ran, when I was an instructor, I ran the fleet transition program with another guy for a while. It was basically, we took guys who wanted to go from the regular Navy and go to Buds, right? And they'd come in and, we'd work them out and train them. And there for like a year, the guys we were recommended, we had like a 75% success rate, right?
Oh,
so we
wow.
had all these people come down like, what did y'all figure out? And I'm like, I literally just talked to them, right? Like the first thing that they did when they came in, I'd say, hey, just write me an essay. Give me a 1-page essay on why you want to be a SEAL. And I can tell if you're full of shit or not.
Okay.
Right. And like we'd go do that. And it was like, okay, this guy's either has like mental or like you're either perfect or you need to go to an insane asylum. Right.
There's no gray area. Yeah.
Like if you're messing with me, you're a perfect fit. If you're serious, like we need to have a talk. But we'd have them. I mean, the thing there, and it was pretty cool because I had like 10 guys go through that program, like make it through Buds and come back to like the team I was at when I was like a chief.
Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Oh, like, thanks for helping. Right. And I never like yelled at them. I was like, I'd go do it with them and I'm like, hey, just keep up with me. If you can do that, then cool.
Yeah.
We came in there one day and it was like, we go in there and like guys were like so terrible at push-ups. And I'm like, guys, like, what are y'all thinking? Like, you think you're going to like be a Navy SEAL and like, your push-ups are terrible. I was like, I'll tell you what, my oldest he just turned 18 and he was like 5 or 6 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, all right, I'm going to bring in my 6-year-old tomorrow. And whoever can't do more push-ups than him, I'm sending you back to your command. I sent 10 guys back to their command.
Oh my
Really?
gosh.
He could crank out some push-ups.
Yeah.
But still, like, if a 6-year-old can beat you,
Right.
like, come on. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of.
So were you, Chad, and I love the fact, because it's one of those things, I think your journey, and I think this probably is why you ultimately, when you were kind of in charge of that program, were having people do that 1-page essay, because for you, I've heard you say, like, your goal wasn't just to get through buds. It was to become a SEAL and serve your country. Like, that was your driving motivator. So it's like that. It's really one of those things where if your purpose, if your mission is clear enough, you're going to be able to get through a lot of different things. Because I love, you tell a story about, like, when you first, I think were at Virginia Beach, where you had some of these, like, real tryhards that were, like, going out there every morning and, like, waking up and doing these crazy workouts and stuff. And you try to do it for a little while, right? And you're like, man, this is not for me or whatever. But really, the separator for you, and you see, and it's interesting that you've kind of gone through this, into this path, as you've gotten older now. But that in that beginning was just a will. It was just like, hey, I have a clear purpose, and that's really what got you through.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that story you touched on, like, A school. I mean, there was guys getting up at, like 4 a.m. and going and surf torturing themselves. And I was like, you guys are nuts. I was like, this doesn't even count, right? It's like, you don't get used to torture, right? And it's like guys that are like, oh, I'm good at cold water. I do 5 minutes in the ice bath. Or, oh yeah, I can go on a long run. Well, there's a fundamental difference between you getting in your ice bath at home, knowing you can get out whenever you want without consequence, and you coming here to my house and me saying, all right, you get in the ice bath until I'm tired of you being cold.
Right.
Or you can quit.
That's huge.
Right. And it's the same thing on runs. And some guys like, well, I just don't tell myself how far I'm going to run. I'm like, that doesn't even work. Right. Cause, like, you'd see it all the time on runs. Like, we'd get close to, like, the Buds compound, and guys would, like, have in their mind, like, oh, we're about to be done. In my mind, I was like, oh, I bet they're going to screw with us and just keep running. And sure enough, just keep running. And, like, 10 guys would quit right there, because they're like, I thought we were done, and now we're going to keep going. Right. So, like, I think that's part of it. Like, how I've, like, guessed, I don't really know. I think that's, like, part of one of, like, just like my natural gifts, right? Like, you take a strength finder test and you look at those and you're like, oh, well, that makes sense how I kind of saw that coming. The other part, like, if you've ever read Stephen Pressfield's War of Art,
okay,
right? It's all about, like, overcoming resistance, right? And resistance is just like, it could be like self-doubt or procrastination. Like, it can show up in a bunch of ways, but it's like anytime you want to better yourself, it's going to pop up. And he prescribes the cure is turning pro. Right. And I didn't really, like, know this at the time, but, like, when I read the book in business school, which is actually the Acton School of Business, which same people who started Acton Academy.
Yeah.
I kind of, like, put two and together of, like, all these, like, hard things I had accomplished. Like, I had turned pro in my mind. So, like, before I became a SEAL, like, I took on the identity of a SEAL, and SEALs make it through SEAL training. Like, Stephen Pressfield, in his book, he talks about, like, hey, I decided, like, I was going to be a drummer, right? So I didn't say, like, oh, I think I'm going to learn how to play the drums. Like, I'm a pro drummer, right? So it's like the drums show up. Well, I don't know how to install them. Well, a pro drummer knows how to play them or install them, right?
Right.
How to play them. Well, a pro drummer goes and learns how to play them, right? So it's like you take that identity before it happens, then you got to show up every day and put in the work. So
it's a little of that fake it till you make it kind of a thing, but it's also, I think, what I'm hearing and what I love, and it doesn't matter whether it's you, Chad, or listening to, like, a Josh Bridges, any of the former Navy SEALs that kind of have a platform now. The one thing that I absolutely admire and love about it is the ability to be present, right? so to your point, I really don't care if we're here back at Bud's training facility. I'm right here, and the next step is the next step. It's not going somewhere with your mind, and it's not, allowing yourself to get out of where you're at right then and there. Right. I mean, there's some discipline to that. And it doesn't shock me that you then take that onto trying to become a professional golfer, because again, John and I have talked about it before, that's probably, while it's not the most physical game, mentally, between that and baseball, in terms of time between plays or time between shots, to where if you can't be present, your mind just manifests all kinds of stuff. Did you find, have you always had that discipline, or was there something that either cultivated it growing up, or because it does play well into everything that you've accomplished so far, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably like parenting
Mm-hmm.
is a big part of it, like homeschooling and kind of like being forced to kind of learn how to learn. It's part of it. And I think with that, like, if you really look at like, okay, how do you learn something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, like first, I think, and I like lay it out in my book, right? And I start with assessment, but I'm working on another book called The Failure Hack, which is really, I think for a lot of people, like they have to start with failure, because until you fail a bunch of times and realize that you don't know anything, you're not really ready to give an honest assessment, and you're not coachable, right? So once you've kind of done that and now you're coachable, you can go do your assessment like, okay, I don't know anything. I need to improve. Let me find somebody who's done this, who can show me that. And then you get the knowledge. That's like part of it. Well, now you have to go build those skills, like step by step, like crawl, walk, run. Like when I talk about, okay, how did I make it through Hell Week? Right. It's the same way, right? I didn't think about like, oh, we're going to run however far you run, hundreds of miles, and paddle and swim and be cold and miserable. I literally like picked something out, like a rock 10 feet in front of me, and was like, okay, well, I can just make it to there. And when I get there, maybe I'll quit.
Yeah.
And I get there and be like, that wasn't that bad. I'll just make it to that next one, and then we'll see what happens. Right. And I just did that for like 5 days.
You reminded me, you remind me there of, I can't remember which guest this was on our show. I want to almost say they were either from that Special Forces tree or SEAL or something, but they said they used to tell themselves, we'll quit tomorrow. Like everything was like, when things were really tough, they'd say, we'll quit tomorrow. Like tomorrow's the time that we'll quit. And it was that same thing. It would just kind of keep them going. And I love that you talk about that failure piece, Chad, because you've even said, failure is fuel. Like that's the thing that gets you going. And it's, I think it's one of those things that for, I think sometimes when people go through failure, it'll either eat at them to the point where they almost can't progress beyond that, or it's something that they'll take those learnings and stuff from that because they recognize some things in it. And speaking of golf, because when I've done some research on you and I've listened to some podcasts and stuff, one of the questions that I keep coming back to is, I've heard you say you'd like to have seen how things would have worked out had you had the money really to continue to do that. So for the listeners, part of the reason you weren't able to continue that journey is just, the income if you're not getting it done out there on the course, then it can be one of those things that sucks the money and the finances will really get to most of the golfers that are trying to do it. Have you gotten to a point, because I've heard you say that you'd love to have seen like what would have happened had you had enough money to continue. Have you gotten to a point, Chad, where are you like one of those people who looks back and has a lot of what ifs, or do you kind of chalk that up to like, there was just a lot of uncontrollables about that? Like I would take that as a learning. I'll take all the things that I can get from that and move on. Or is that one of those things that kind of every so often just creeps up like, man, I still would love to have known?
I'd say I don't have any regret at all with it.
Yeah.
Right. Because at the end of the day, like how many people actually go after their dream.
Right.
Now, for me, it was like I went after, I mean, my first one was like to become a SEAL. I did that one. Then, all right, can I make it to the PGA Tour, right? Which is arguably like one of the hardest things you can do. It's like joining a club of 125 people, right? And people are good at golf. I don't know if y'all know that or not, but there's a lot of good people, right? So I did it for 3 years. The last 6 months, I was actually good enough.
Right.
Rest of the time, I wasn't even good enough. But I didn't really know that until I got started, right? And I mean, I played with PGA Tour players like every day, right, around here. But, I had a lot of learning to do. I had a lot of skills to build, right? It's like I really had to like hone on, and I really like learned, oh, wow, this is how you build a skill. This is how you build a system around it. This is how you understand like statistics and how to use them to your advantage. So you can use this in business. You can use it in anything, right? But it was like a buddy of mine. He's like, hey, Chad, you ever read any golf statistics? I was like, no, why? He goes, well, I'm going to send you an article and then read it and then we'll talk. And I'm like, okay. So I read it and I look at it. I'm like, shit, like freaking from 100 yards out, shots to hole is 2.4 shots on the PGA Tour. And he's like, okay, what does that tell you? I was like, well, it probably tells me I'm an idiot, because whenever I'm in the woods and I'm like, oh, I'm going to hit it under this tree, over this tree, through this little hole to try to make birdie, and I get it freaking 4% of the time, and the rest of the time I make a triple. Like if I just hit it to 100 yards, like the worst I'm making is 5. If I'm not doing that, then that means I need some work on my wedges, right? So it's like, it took me 2 years to learn that lesson.
Sure.
Right. Because it's like, okay, we'll just, go for the one. So part of it's like, okay, play the percentages, which means like build your skills and then hit a shot you can hit 90% of the time. Like how confident are you going to be if you hit that?
Right.
Right. So that was part of it. The other part was like, you're playing golf, not like golf swing.
Right.
Right. So the last time I went to Q school was for the, like PGA Tour Canada. First day I shot 5 over, and like I go up there, I like to hit a 5-yard cut, and I'm hitting a 12-yard draw, and I just hate the way it looks. And it's just like, I'm like, oh, this is so bad. And I shoot 5 over. I go to the range. I worked with Kevin Kirk after a while, and he's like, okay, what's your training schedule? I was like, well, I practice like 15 hours a day. And he's like, okay, stop there. He's like, you get 5 hours and here's what you get to hit. And after a tournament, you can have 30 minutes after a round to practice, but that's all you get. And I'm like a stickler for following systems.
Right.
This draw, I go out, I practice for 30 minutes. I'm like, okay, there's my 5-yard cut. I'm good. Show up the next morning, not hitting a 5-yard cut, 12-yard draw. And I was like, screw it. I'm going to just dance with the girl I brought.
Sure. That's right.
And I went like 32 holes without a bogey.
Wow.
Right. Ended up like, I think I missed getting my card by like four shots. Had a couple Monday qualifiers where I was close. But it was like the third time I ran out of money. Like we were so poor, we had to go to a food bank.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I can't do this to my family anymore. Like I need to figure out a way to make money, because this is like affecting them. So went out and like I applied for 100 jobs, like no joke, like Indeed, freaking LinkedIn, like anywhere you can apply for a job, I applied. And it didn't even matter what it was. And I got like one interview, and it was for a marketing company. Right. And went in there and I'm like, I'll be honest with you, I don't know anything about marketing, but I'm really good at figuring stuff out. So like, if you just give me a chance,
right,
I'll knock it out of the park. And I didn't get hired. Seems like their mistake. I'm actually pretty good at digital marketing now.
I would say so.
Anyway, got that like, okay, can't get a job. I'll like just sit on my couch, like depressed, playing Call of Duty, just trying to like distract myself with something else. And my wife's like, you got to figure something out. So I'm like, okay, fine. All right. So my neighbor was a San Antonio police officer. He's like, hey, my buddy's a recruiter. we could probably get you in the next academy. I'm like, okay, cool. Another buddy of mine, I'm like, hey, he's like, hey, there's this business school in Austin. It's taught by entrepreneurs. I think you'd be a great fit. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll just apply to both. So I apply to both. Police Academy comes back and is like, yeah, we'd love to have you, but the next deal doesn't start until January. And this is like August, September timeframe.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to starve to death before January.
Right.
The business school calls me back and they're like, hey, we'd love to have you. We just started this current course 2 weeks ago, so you'll have to wait for a year. And I'm like, you freaking kidding me? So like we talk and I'm like, screw that. I called the school back, got a hold of like the decision maker. And I'm like, look, if you just give me a chance, I will catch up. I will outwork every person there. And he's like, no one's ever asked me that before. He's like, okay, if you can come up with a $5,000 deposit by Friday, then you're in. And I was like, okay, I have $12. So I had to do the one thing like all SEALs hate to do is ask for help.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I called my brother, called my sister, called a friend of mine, had the money in like 2 days, paid it. My GI Bill kicked in. So I had like BAH, it paid for school, paid them back. Ended up freaking finishing like the valedictorian equivalent of the class because I went in and kept my promise to outwork everybody. But yeah, that school was truly incredible.
Did you find it? I mean, so we've talked to former athletes and former service members. There seems to be a very big gap from when you get out to when you get to start the next thing. And I find it something that I think societally need to work on, because to do what you want to do, you have to immerse yourself. And so like you at times will forget as an athlete that you're an individual, because you've always been Chad the golfer or Chad the Navy SEAL. You've never just kind of been Chad. And to have the skill set that you have and to not get more, I guess, love as you're coming out and trying to find a place. Did you find that very difficult to wrestle with? I mean, were you surprised by that? I'm surprised.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, right? So it was like, and I think like this, like there's a PTSD crisis and all that, but I think an even bigger problem, it's like an identity crisis.
100%.
Because you have this thing of like, I spent my entire adult life as like a SEAL and an athlete, and when that's gone, like, well, who are you now?
Who am I?
Right. So like that's really in part of the business school I went to, like there's, part of it is kind of this like life of meaning, next great adventure. I've actually like, I'm working with the guy who founded it, and I actually run people through the next great adventure now because it was like so life changing for me. But that was like my biggest problem looking back is like, I didn't like have an identity anymore. Like I took on the identity to become a SEAL, and I'd live that. And I took on the identity of like a golfer to try to like become that. But when that was gone, I was like, I don't know what I'm good at outside of that. I don't know what I care about or what I want to do. And I don't even know where to get started. Right. So it's like guys come out and they're like, well, I need to get a job. And you're like, hey, I need to get a job. And they're like, well, people are like, well, what do you want to do? And you're like, well, I don't know. What is there? Right. And it's like, that's the big problem. It's like Mark Twain says, it's like, I can teach anybody how to get what they want out of life. The problem is I can't get anybody to tell me what they want. Right. So for me, it was like, first I had to figure out what my God-given strengths are and how they applied to business and life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of like the first part of answering the question of like, who am I? Well, you got to figure out like, wait, what are you good at? Like naturally.
Right.
And then go and like build those things. And then how do those apply in the business world? And then like, what's your spark, which is like, what's the thing that makes you come alive? Right. What's the thing you care about? Because if you go do that, like, are you really working? Right. If you do the thing you love every day, like, how awesome is that? Right. So
go be a pro at it. Right.
Yeah.
No,
so that's really it.
So true. It's so true. And, one of the things you're really good at is teaching the mental game. And one of the things that I know you're also passionate about is being a father and being a coach to young athletes. And I'm curious because, the listeners heard there in the beginning of the show is that, you are an author of the Young Athlete's Ultimate Guide to Mental Toughness. What was that point that, prompted you to write this book and said, hey, I think I needed to take this a step further than just talking to a few athletes that I'm coaching?
Yeah. So, part of the reason I got out is I've got 3 boys and I wanted to be around to see them grow up. I think my last, 2 years in the Navy, I was gone 20 months out of the year. Right. So, you're not coaching Little League, you're not coaching flag football, you're not doing any of that kind of stuff. So I was like, okay, definitely like the golf thing, but the be around thing was probably more important than that. So since then, I've coached all my kids in almost every team they've been on. Maybe 1 or 2 I didn't because I was in business school or something.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But, for me, I've kind of been lived in a bubble, right? Of around the most focused, driven, disciplined, mentally tough people on the planet. So for me, that's just what you did. And when I started coaching my kids and then all these other kids, I started realizing that no one else, at least very few amount of people, actually thought this way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I'd go out and coach a kid, and a kid would go up to pitch and be nervous and then think there was something wrong with himself. And I'm
right.
Dude, of course you're nervous. You've never pitched in a game before. Everyone's watching you.
Right.
Right? This is the most pressure you've ever been in your life, probably.
Yeah.
And it's, oh yeah. I'm are you nervous right now? No, coach. I'm come on, you can tell me. Yeah, I'm nervous. I'm okay, just throw it 10 feet over the catcher into the backstep on your first pitch.
Hit the bull.
That's right. Hit the bull.
I'm who cares?
Yeah.
If you walk this batter, what's going to happen? He's going to go. If you strike him out, what's going to happen? Is your life going to be different tomorrow?
Right.
No. And at the end of the day, nobody remembers in 5 years, in a year from now, who won 10U baseball, right?
Yeah.
Who cares? Right. But it's can you learn the skills of how to learn from failure? There's and 99% of kids are never going to play high school sports, college sports, let alone professional sports at that age. But there's so many life lessons that can be learned through sports, right? And that's what I try to do with them. That's why I wrote the book, to give the kids a tool. And I give all kids on my team a signed copy. I gave them all out last night
that's
at
awesome.
the game.
Yeah.
And
it's so funny, Chad, because you talk about that intentional failure almost. I think about Andy Reese, our buddy that has been on the show a couple of times, and Andy talks about that intentional discomfort, whatever the case would be. And you're the epitome of this as a dad, because I love in the book that you talk about the story of actually, I think it's pretty close to the beginning of the book, of when you're, I guess when he was 13, you moved your oldest son, Maverick, up from the kids classes of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to the adult classes because he was no longer challenging himself. Brandon, this is a kid that by the time he was 7 years old had already won the Virginia Judo Open Championship twice, right? So he's no longer challenging himself. And so Chad moves him up to the adult classes to, hey, okay, we're going to start challenging you now. But Chad, also, you started seeing some confidence changes, some enthusiasm for the classes. Talk a little bit about that and maybe some of the lessons you were hoping to get Maverick to understand in that moment.
Yeah. So, anytime you move up to a new level, right? And I've probably gotten this email 100 times of, my kid was dominating last year, and this year their confidence is completely gone. And I'm did they move up a level? They're well, yeah. I'm well, it's a totally different game now.
Right.
You're starting. Right. So that's what I wanted my kid to feel, the struggle, right? Because that's where you really have to dig deep and learn. Right. So I moved into the adult class, and I told everyone in there, I'm don't go easy on him. Don't hurt him. I'm going to roll with you after. But don't go easy on him. So he was just getting smashed. We're talking tears, wanted to quit jujitsu, right? So it's like we hit that failure, right? And then I'm like, I didn't have the like system written out yet, but I was like, I was doing it. And I'm like, okay, well, why do you think that is? He's like, everyone's bigger than me. Everyone's stronger than me. And I was like, well, what about your technique? He's like, yeah, my technique sucks too. And I was like, okay, what are we going to do about it? Well, I don't know. I'm like, well, we can get stronger. You can start lifting weights. He's like, okay. I'm like, well, you're going to grow. Okay. And I'm like, well, and you could probably start working on your defense. Like you haven't really had to defend in the past year against any of these kids. Like you could start working on learning how to defend better. He's like, okay, fine. So we start lifting weights. We start drilling at home. Start doing that. He still wants to quit. And I'm like, all right, we'll get in the car. We're going to class. You can cry after.
Right.
We do this and it's like, I don't know if it was quite a year. It was a while of this, and he's lifting weights. He's getting stronger. I can feel it. I'm like, all right, he's getting close. And this new guy comes in, like fresh white belt, right? And it's like a 20-year-old kid. Here he is, like 13, maybe 14, maybe he just turned 14. Comes in there, and he beat the ever living crap out of this kid, like rear naked choked, like submitted him all this time, like made him cry.
Wow.
I don't think the guy ever came back.
Oh, wow.
But the attitude from then changed. Like on the ride home, he sat and he was like, yeah, that's what's up.
That's right.
Now, it didn't mean he didn't get beat again.
Sure.
Yeah.
But he knew, he was like, oh, it flipped in his mind. Like he knew he could do it. Right. He's like, oh, okay, I get it. I put in the work. I get the result. Right. And since then we've gone and trained. He's not training a lot right now. He's working on other stuff. But when he was training, like we were training in Austin, like I don't know if y'all familiar with the jiu-jitsu world at all.
I mean, the gray season. I mean, some of the
like John Danaher.
Yeah.
So we were training under John Danaher.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When not at the time, like John wasn't in Austin whenever Maverick was doing the move to this adult class, but we moved over there. We're training under John, and Maverick was doing some of these super fights, right? As like a 16-year-old. He goes against this like 24-year-old former D1 wrestler. Submits him in 15 seconds.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Like, I mean, like, and he was like, I don't know, 135 pounds, something like that. But he'd go in the gym, we'd go roll at other places, and he'd roll with this guy who's like 35 years old, 6'4", 230, right? He's got 100 pounds on him. And the guy kind of looks, he's like, oh, I'm going to play around with him. Maverick freaking arm drags him on his back, rear naked choke. And you can see the guy like just up the intensity, like, oh, heck no. He's trying to like snap it to a slim jim. Maverick just dominating him. And you're like, I'm like, yeah, that's what's up.
Well, what a great lesson to, like you said, not only is it put in the work, get the result. It's when all this shit around that I can't control is happening, I can always turn to my controllables, right? I can work on my defense. I can control the amount of time that I'm putting into it. I can control getting into the weight room. I can control what my sleep and diet and all the things that should get me to a result that I want to get to. I may not get to that result, but I can at least put the work in and I can control what I can control. And then I don't have to regret anything. There's no what ifs. There's none of that. Right. I mean, I think it's such a powerful lesson for parents and any leader to teach anybody is that, look, man, there's always going to be stuff swirling around. Focus on the things that you can control and let the outcome take care of itself. But at least you've done what you can do at that point in time.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, the book is basically, I could have titled it and written it 100 different ways, right? I wrote it because I wanted something my kids could easily read and understand, and like the kids I was coaching and those parents. But the system, it's really a system for how do you execute and accomplish any goal. Mm-hmm. Like I just recently, like my YouTube channel started blowing up. Like I'm freaking made the YouTube partner program. I got
nice.
Like, literally like top 5 hardest things I've ever done. I use the system in the Young Athlete's Ultimate Guide to Mental Toughness to do it. Right. So it's literally for anything, right? Because it's like, okay, I had to like fail, make a bunch of videos. Like I made 100 videos in 100 days and they all sucked. Right. And it's like, okay, I suck at this. I have no idea what I'm doing. That's my assessment. Right. And then I go to like, let me find somebody who knows what the heck they're doing. Mm-hmm. So I did that. And I'm like, oh, you've got a system. Learn their system. And how do you learn? Well, first they tell you, then you have to go do. Mm-hmm. And then you get feedback. Right. So it's like, I'm getting feedback. How you did this good. You did this bad. Right. And you're failing and you're learning from it and you're freaking iteratively improving. Right. So, and that's the funny thing is when you go and do this iterative improvement. Mm-hmm. Right. And then you go back and get feedback and you go back to the coach. Like they're probably telling you the same things, but they actually make sense now because now you have the context in which they apply.
That's right.
Don't go actually start doing. Things don't actually make sense.
Application all theory and no application gets you nowhere.
Right. Well, and look, it's the, and I'm glad you started to break some of that down because that whole idea of self-assessment, the goal setting, seeking knowledge, all that, the deliberate practice, and what you're talking about there, and I was hoping you might unpack this a little bit more for the listeners because you talked about, it's like that training mindset and then the mastering competition mindset or the high performance mindset. Like, what's the difference for the listeners there, the training mindset versus that competitive? And maybe it's just it's not a matter of there being a difference, it's a matter of how they work together.
I mean, there's definitely a big difference, I'd say. But I'd say depending on what it is, right? Like you may just stay in the training mindset, right? The training mindset is also very close to like the growth mindset.
Okay.
So like for athletes, this really applies once they start getting to like a higher level. Like if you're, like high school varsity level and above, this is where like competition mindset really comes into play. But you have to build your skill set up before you can really go to the competition mindset, right? So like, here's the difference right here. And you'll see this if you listen to like Joe Rogan, John Danaher, like he talks about this a lot. And you'll see it like in jujitsu, like training, where guys try to just win in training, right? So they're like, I don't want to get submitted. I want to tap everyone in training and be the baddest dude in the room, right? Well, the thing is, they go with the things they're already good at, right? And they don't push themselves to like, let me try this new technique. Let me put myself in a bad spot and work on escaping out of it. Let me get the reps in on this new thing, right? So then their opponents go and like know their bread and butter, right? Which they're doing against people in the gym, but they're going to go compete against the best dudes in the world and they get shut down because they're not like expanding their weapons.
Yeah.
So the guys who go in and like take this training mindset of like, I'm in training. In training, I'm going to take risks. I don't care if I fail in training. I'm going to get better. Right. And you could take that training mindset in actual like competitions, right? You just have to assess like, where am I at? Right. So if you're like, I'm still in the learning phase, like I'm going to go out and still like, hey, it's okay if I fail. Like I'm working on getting better. Where the competition mindset comes in is when you've built the skills. And now you're going to like go and compete. Like we talked about the golf statistics, right?
Yeah.
This is where training or competition mindset comes in, right? Now I'm going to be more strategical in how I execute. So I'm going to take the thing I know I can do 90% of the time because I've trained it. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm going to do in competition.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, I'm going to hit this shot. Well, is this a 9 out of 10 shot? If it's not, then don't hit that shot.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. And now just give yourself a chance, right? By not freaking having a big blow up hole in golf or whatever it is. Right. Yeah. So that's the big difference. Training mindset, take risks, learn and grow. Competition mindset, freaking take the skills you've built and play the percentages. So if you're a pitcher and you're like, I've got 2 pitches that I know I can throw every time, don't try to throw the third pitch that you execute 30% of the time.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Well, we hear it all the time, right? You never elevate to the level of competition. You always regress to the level of your training.
Yep.
Right. I mean, that's ultimately where you're at. And I love the idea that that training mindset allows for that deliberate failure, not deliberate failure, but it
You
gives
can
you
go
an
throw that
opportunity.
30%er, right? Go
Yeah.
throw the percenter.
Throw it. Why
You
not?
may not have a 90%er yet.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
in you that are pitching, their training mindset. They do not have something they can do 90% of the time.
100% agree.
Yeah.
And it's so critical for development. Again, because what you're talking about is building resiliency in young people, and it is lost today. I have 3 kids as well, and my youngest is my son. He's 16. He's a football player, runs track, the whole thing. The one thing that I try to instill in him on a daily basis is, if you will have just a hair of grit and resilience in you, you can dominate. And it's resiliency is a lost thing, because we as parents and as leaders, we don't embrace and we don't encourage failure enough. Or maybe it's not encourage failure, but at least encourage the risk taking that I think we all had growing up, where no one's taking a picture of my failure. No one's going to post it. I don't have to worry about it. I can just go out there and do it. I love that you're injecting that.
Yeah, I think a lot of
through
kids
your stuff.
too. It's like, I mean, part of it's like we ask the wrong questions are asked, and then kids are overcoached.
Sure.
Right. It's like you get up there, and I think, parents want to help, but whenever you're talking a kid's up there 10 years old trying to pitch, and you're talking to him about his release point, like, bro, you're taking any chance that kid and just flushing it down the toilet. Like, if you would have told me like 3 minutes before I teed off in the tournament, like, hey, you're coming in a little bit steep, and whenever you come in, try to get here and here, I'm like, bro, like, I'm going to shoot 100.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it doesn't help. Like, you have to get that in training.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, and it goes back to that training mindset stuff, is that with nowadays, with baseball especially, you see so many of these guys that are going to their pitching guy, or they're going to their swing guy, and it's all of these controlled environments where the dude that's their hitting guy is now just grooving fastballs at a certain speed the whole time, just so that the kid can sit there and find barrel after barrel, so that the parents who are watching this and putting $50 up an hour can feel good about themselves, because they just watched Johnny just barrel everything in the cage. But then, and he's in that training mindset, but then when he gets into the competitive mindset and needs to be able to flip into that or go out and compete, he's not really going to ever get there, because he's always stuck in that training mindset of, well, when I'm in the cage, coach is always just sitting there feeding me everything I can sit there in time, and nothing's coming off speed or anything. So
there's no stakes, right? Yeah. And that's a big thing I do in our practice, is I make sure there's stakes in practice.
Yeah.
Right. Whether that's like, all right, I put every single person at second base, and you've got to field it and throw it to first. If you do it, we'll move on to something else. If one person misses it, the whole team runs.
Mm-hmm.
That last kid. Oh man, like, there's stakes. I'll tell you what, our freaking playoff game, nobody missed a grounder.
Yeah.
Why? Because they're used to playing under stakes, right? That's it. And my kid, he's like become a pretty good hitter. He's our number 2 hitter. A year ago, he was scared to get in the batter's box. Right. So it's like, how did I get him there? Right. It was like, well, first I had to figure out what motivated him. It was Slurpees. Right. So we started with like, all right, all you got to do is not jump out of the batter's box when the pitch comes your entire at bat. I don't care if you get struck out, you get walked, you get hit by the pitch. If you don't jump out of the batter's box, you get a Slurpee on the way home.
Yeah.
Got a Slurpee. Then it was like, okay, he got that down. Now it's like, you just have to make contact with the ball. I don't care if it goes foul, fair. Every time you make contact is a Slurpee. Then it was like, okay, now it's got to be fair, and now it's got to be on base. Now he doesn't need a slurper anymore. Our batting practice the other day, we went down to the creek, and he had a stick, and I threw rocks to him.
Right.
He hit him. Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's how I practice as a kid. Like, if you can hit a rock with a stick, like, how big is a baseball?
Absolutely.
Sure.
No, I mean that is such a good thing. It's like it's working on figuring it out, and it reminds me of one of the snippets I saw of you and our buddy Brett McCabe was you all were talking about the thing about Navy SEALs is you all are resourceful and will always figure it out, and it reminded me of, it's that you talked about, you said, I believe that's what mental toughness is. It's that problem solving mindset. It's like figuring out a way. One of my favorite questions I ask myself when trying to solve something or accomplish a goal is I always am asking, what else can I do? Like, how else can I get this thing accomplished? I've tried X, Y, and Z, but maybe I need to restart and go back to A, B, and C. Like I need to figure because there's some path through it. I just need to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely it. And that's kind of what I would do. Now I actually just kind of shortcut that and I go try to find the person who's already done it and see what they did. And then I just copy what they did, right? Until I learn the system and then you can make it your own.
Yeah.
So I think that's really like the hack, right? I think like we live in this society of instant gratification and, you look at everybody's highlight reel on social media and you think that success just comes easily. But if you really want to look at it, go read the backstory behind what happened to get there. And it's a different story.
Absolutely. I just saw something recently and I hope I don't butcher this, but it was something about like surround yourself with people whose normal is your next level. It's like what they do on a daily basis, what they consider routine is your kind of next level. And I think that's such a powerful thing. So Chad, let's talk about this in the last, maybe 10 minutes here of this is I am curious because Brandon talked about resilience earlier. And I think you provide such a unique perspective as not only from your military background, but from the golfing background, coaching, whatever the case may be, is we hear that, and Brandon even mentioned it earlier, grit. We hear that all the time. Like, what do you kind of define grit as? Like, what's that thing that you feel like best embodies somebody who has that grittiness you're looking for?
There's a few ways we could go with that answer. I think a big part of it is just like understanding the mastery path. Like we just did this like a book review thing on the mastery. So it's like fresh in my mind, but understanding like what it takes to actually master something, right, is going to help you stick that path. Right. And then the other part of it is like, you've taken on the identity of like, hey, I'm not just going to go try this out. Right. Like I'm committed. This is what I'm going to do. Right. At least, for like, I'm going to give everything I can to make this work. Like something may happen and like, hey, it doesn't work. Like for me, like it was, I don't know, 7-8 businesses before I got one to work. Right. So it's like, oh, well, you failed all those times. Well, I mean, I guess, yeah, I did. But in each one of those, I learned a specific skill that used at the culmination of all of them came together. So I think it's like, in business and life, it's a lot like baseball. It's like, how many times can you get up to bat? Except like in business, like if you hit a home run, like it's not 1 point, you could hit 1,000 points.
Right.
Right. So it's, I think a big part of it is like to have grit, like start with the right thing. Like in business, like Acton School of Business is real big on like opportunity analysis. Like do the unit economics work? Is it a good customer? Like what's the competition look like? Does this line up with your strengths? Does it, is it something you're passionate about? Like, do you really want to do this for the next 10 years? Like all these things, like that's a good place to start. It makes it a lot easier to follow through. But I mean, part of it is, like with my kids, I don't force them to play sports. Like I don't force them to live my dreams. I try to like just model it by living my own dreams. But I try to say like, hey, if you're going to do this, like you committed to play baseball, like you're not quitting mid-season.
Yeah.
You can finish the season and quit and tell me you never want to play baseball again, and that's fine. But like you made a commitment to the team, so like we're going to finish.
I love and it's, you mentioned acting a couple of times there, and I love so much this, philosophy, this mission of that acting academy, of that find your calling, change the world, right? It's that, like, because what you're talking about there is that passion, and that feeds the grit. Like, if you're passionate about something, if you're purposeful about it, like, that's going to help you be, kind of going all the way back to finished SEAL training, right? Like, it's that same thing as, like, when you have that true identity there. And I love that part of that academy is the parents, Brandon, actually sign an agreement that basically promises to let their kids fail. Like, if their kids are failing, if they are struggling, that they're not going to intervene. They're not going to prepare the path for the child. They're going to help support acting of preparing the child for the path, kind of a thing.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, that is it's basically the struggle phase, right? And it's because it's a mastery based learning, right? So if you look at, there's multiple types of learning, right? I mean, there's basically 4. There's learning to learn, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to know, right? Acton focuses on the first 3. Traditional education focuses on learning to know, right? So that's like, you sit there, be quiet. I'm going to tell you what you need to know, and you're going to regurgitate it back to me, right? And you go to that, and you might be like, "Oh, I'm not good at math. I'm not a good writer." All these things, right? Like, I hated writing. Thought I was terrible at it. Maybe I am, but I wrote a book last year, right? And why? Because I was interested in it, right? And it's like, I dropped out of college. 2 years later, I was a Navy SEAL. Why? Because it was my idea, right? So that's like the magic of Acton Academy, is you have to give kids the room for it to be their idea. And we see, like, all the time, like, kids learn to read in like 7 days because it's their idea. Right. So you've got different kinds of kids will have, like, behave differently. You've got the kid who will come in and, like, get all their badges, do all their stuff. There's no grades. It's mastery based. You move to the next level whenever you have 100% of the previous level. There's no 70s. You get 100%, you can move to the next level. Right. And you go through Excellence Council, and all your badges get approved and all that stuff. And, like, you have to earn it. There's no shortcuts. So you have the kids who go in there and knock at their badges. Then you have the other kids who goof off, and they're distracted and get some strikes. But what happens is their friends get ready to move up to the next studio. So you have, like, this is like basically the 21st century single room schoolhouse, right? So you have 1st through 5th grades all in a single studio. The kindergarten's in a studio, middle school, high schooler, but they all share a campus. So they all interact, and they had to go and mentor younger students, right?
Wow.
What happens is you get this peer group, and their friends are about to move up.
Mm-hmm.
What they figured out is a motivated individual can complete all of elementary school in 4 months. 1st through 5th grade be done in 4 months. And I have seen this myself. My middle son, when he was in, like, 3rd grade, he's like, "Dad, I need that new pair of Ultra Boosts." And I'm like, "Buddy, I just got you new shoes like a month ago. We're not getting new Ultra Boosts." He's like, "Come on, Dad, I gotta have them. They're, like, so clean."
Yeah. Bro, they'd be so trippy. Come on.
I'm like, "Well, where are you at on math? What percentage are you at Khan Academy?" He's like, "I'm at 1%. I'm like, "Bro, it's January. Like, what have you been doing?" He's like, "I don't know. Been hanging out." I'm like, "All right." And this is on, like, Sunday. I'm like, "All right, dude, tell me when you're at 100. We'll go get those Ultra Boosts." Friday afternoon, "Dad, I'm at 100. Let's go get those Ultra Boosts."
What?
Whole level of math in a week. Why? Yeah. Because he wanted those Ultra Boosts. So it's really like, so what Acton, I mean, he touched on it. It's find your calling, change the world, right? So if you start from the time you're, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old with this, like, wow, I have a calling. I could change the world. I'm going to find my gifts. I'm learning SMART goals. I'm learning the mastery path. I'm learning about the monsters of distraction, resistance, and victimhood, and how I overcome, distraction by Pomodoro, Eisenhower matrix. I come over resistance with discipline. I overcome victimhood with gratitude, right? They're like learning all these skills. Like if they have arguments with each other's, like they go to the like peace council table and they like reconcile their differences. There's no teachers. There's only guides, right? The guides are forbidden from making any declarative statements. They can only answer questions with a question. They cannot give any answers. You can use your 3 Bs. You can use your brain. You can use, I don't know what the other one's, like a resource. Like you can use your brain. You can use a book, or you can use a buddy, right? And that's how you problem solve. So they're like literally having to go figure it out.
That's awesome.
It's like
that is incredible. Awesome.
If you can like write it out and just like change your thinking of this idea of like get good grades, go to college, get a career. If you can just agree that that's bullshit, then you'll be fine as a parent then, right? And I think like we've been like fed that of like get good grades. What do good grades tell you? Like, does that mean you're going to be successful in life? Like, no, most A students work for C students. Go to college. Like, well, I have a master's degree. My undergrad's pretty much worthless. Like the MBA, where the Acton School of Business. Now that was awesome, but undergrad, that was like a waste of time. Like, I mean, I tried for like, I started it and I'm like, I did it while I was active duty. So like the first thing I'd like, okay, read all the stuff, do all the assignments, get an A. And then I'd be like, do none of the assignments, make up all the papers and get a B. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So then it's like, get a career, get a safe job. Like, what does that even mean? Is there such a thing? Like, I don't know. I don't think there is.
Not one that you want.
No. I'm telling you.
There's no passion in safety, right? No. I mean, honestly, there's no passion in safety. Safety is the killer of dreams, man.
Yeah. So that's what, so one of the things I'm doing now is, it's part of kind of the Acton curriculum, but it's called the Next Great Adventure, right? And so Quest 1, it's 6 weeks. I just ran a cohort. I had like, former like Google executives, YouTube executives in there. And it's like, we're going through this thing and again, like I'm in there, like I'm guiding it. I don't answer any questions. I just ask you questions, right? They're pointed to try to get you to like, go figure this thing out, but you got to figure out who you are. I can't answer that for you. Mm-hmm. But like, I mean, Jeff Sandifer kind of has developed the whole thing and like laid this system out for the past 30 years. Like it's brilliant. Laid out like, here's how you find your strengths. Here's how you find your spark, like all these things. And like testimonials coming out of this, people like, wow. I'm like, I had people, like my oldest was in it. So I had people from like 18 to 55 in there. People were like, 45 years old. They're like, wow, I've never even thought about any of this.
That's fantastic. The Next Great Adventure. And that's something I guess people could just go to a website and check it out. And is it for targeted, you said 18 to 55 or whatever, but I'm sure it's ageless, right? I mean, anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's ageless. I mean, where it's really great is, whenever, I mean, for me, it was like, okay, I was done with being a SEAL, with being a golfer, and like, what the heck do I do next?
Right.
And I think all our lives are a series of next great adventures, right?
Yeah.
Like you're doing one thing and you do that and like, okay, that thing's kind of over. I got to figure out a next thing to do.
Yeah.
Like, what is this whole like retirement thing? Like, I'm going to retire and go like sit on the beach and like, what kind of life of meaning is that? Right. Like, I think like our purpose is like to find your gift. Your work of life is to develop your gift. And then the meaning is to like give it away. Right. So,
yeah,
I mean, that's really kind of, so my thought was initially I was like trying to market to, like young adults, like high school, college age students, because it'd be super powerful. Like if you can start with that. Mm-hmm. The problem is like most teens don't realize they have a problem yet.
Right. They haven't figured that part of it out.
They haven't figured that out yet, but the parents have figured that out. So my thought is if I can impact the parents first, it trickles down to the kids because they're modeling it.
Well, one thing I mean, there's so much good stuff. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking once again, like where'd the hour go? But one thing that I hope, Chad, because I know that a lot of times with high performing individuals, we kind of all get caught up in the process. We get caught up in, to your point, the next great adventure, the growth mindset. And it's always kind of a go, go, go thing. And the only time we really look back is if we're trying to look back to reflect on something that we can learn from so that we can apply it to the path and be able to move forward. But I hope, and the more I've researched about you and just seen what an impressive dude you are, I hope that you do take time and look back and say, man, you've accomplished a ton of stuff. I mean, literally, and made a tremendous impact on a lot of people already. So I hope that as you're continuing to look for that next great adventure, you're also taking time to look back and say, damn, this has been pretty impressive. The things that you've been able to do. I mean, professional golf, just one of any of the chapters in your life, most people would be like, hey, sign me up for that one. I'll go ahead and, I'll pin it on my chest.
I'll do that one. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll do that one. So, kudos to you, man. And, I don't want to, I was thinking about this as I was driving around today, and I do want to ask you one more question, but, and I hope we don't get in trouble. There's no secret, national security secrets or anything like that. But the thing about the Navy SEALs I always wonder is, like, can you think of one like, oh shit moment story? Like you were on a mission or something like that, and you all were just like, oh my God, this is just crazy. How did I get here? Probably asking you for one was the most challenging part about that.
I mean, really, like IEDs going off was kind of like, oh shit.
Yeah.
But really, like, on my first deployment, I lost track. It was something around like 150 direct action missions.
Holy cow.
Like we were busy.
Yeah.
And I was at like JTAC, comm guy, assaulter. So it was like, I went on everything.
Yeah.
But like, we were sneaky. Right. So we actually like didn't get in a ton of gunfights because like we would just like pick the locks and sneak in.
Right.
Actually, like my craziest oh shit SEAL story was like in Turkey. And we were there training the Turkish SEALs during the week. And on the weekend, we'd stay at Taksim Square. And I'd gone there, and I guess I'd like taken over as the platoon chief, and my buddy that was the chief moved up to like the troop chief, and we'd stay in Taksim Square, and there was like 3 of us that played golf, right? And I'd already kind of like, this was my last deployment, and I was like, all right, I'm getting out of the Navy, I'm gonna play golf, right? And we're there. It was like the 3rd weekend. I'm like, hey, looking on my iPhone, I'm like, dude, it looks like there's a golf course like 2 miles from here. So we're like, y'all want to go play golf? And let's do it. So do we go to the concierge and line it up? No, because that would be the smart thing to do. So we go and hail a cab. We're like, hey, guy doesn't speak English. And I'm like pointing my iPhone, can you take us here? He's like, oh, yes, my friend. We'll take it. I'm like, all right, sweet. So we get in the cab. We're rolling. I'm like tracking on my map. We pull in to what we thought was a golf course. And these dudes draw down on us with like Galils. And we're
What?
like, I'm like, okay, like not here. All right. Like it looks like if we like go down and around and come back. So we go down and we go around and we come up to like, it's like a military base. And I'm like, this is weird. We go up there and they're talking. I don't understand what they're saying. And they're like, oh, this is just military. And I was like, oh, we're military. And he's like, oh, okay. Let's us on the base.
Oh, no.
Now, we were working with the Turkish military, but not this part of the military.
Right.
So we're like driving around. It's like Turkish military base housing. And I'm like, this is not a golf course. So we go down, we box out of there, we leave, we go down to the next entrance. We pull in and there's somebody who speaks English and knows what we're talking about. And he's like, oh, there used to be a golf course here when this was a British base, but there's no golf course here. There hadn't been one in like 15, 20 years. But there's a golf course that's like over in blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
The cab driver, I'm like, how far is it? He goes, oh, my friend, not far. how much will it cost? Oh, my friend, not much. And I'm like, screw it. Let's go. We go and we get out of Istanbul and we're like driving and I'm like, are we headed towards Syria?
Oh no.
Like looking and I've got like a Spyderco pocket knife and I'm like, am I going to have to stab this guy? These are the thoughts going through my head. And I'm like,
am I going to have to stab this guy?
I'm like the senior dude. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is about to be an international incident. Like we were so screwed.
I just wanted to play 18.
Right.
I just wanted to try that new Titleist drive. And we pull into this town. It's like Aspen, Colorado. I'm like, where the heck did this come from?
Right.
And you're like, there's a like 5-star resort golf course. And this dude, like, it's like Caddyshack. He like pulls on the cart path. We're driving down the hole in this piece of crap cab. People are chasing us from the pro shop and like yelling at us. And I'm like, dude, I don't think you're supposed to do this. He's like, oh, in my country, we do whatever I want. I'm like,
okay, my friend.
Okay. Anyway, he pulls up and I'm like, how much? He's like, oh, it's 500 euro. And you're like, bro, like, no. But they run these scams where it's like their cousins, the sheriff, police, and they'll put you in jail if you don't pay. So I was like, no, I'm not paying that. I'll give you 200 euro. And he's like, okay, fine. Just still a ripoff.
Right.
We got per diem. Haven't been spending much money. So we can pay him the 200 euro. We go in there. We rent clubs. We play golf. Fantastic golf course, like 5-star. We get lost in between 2 holes. And we get chased by these wild dogs in what looks like a bombed out Call of Duty map. Anyway, we find our way back on the golf course. We finish the round. We go in the pro shop, talk to the pro. He speaks English. And I'm like, hey, can you get us a ride back to Taksim Square in Istanbul? He's like, oh, yeah, no problem. Like, how much was it going to cost? He's like, oh, 20 euro.
Oh, no way.
Of course it does.
Right.
So this guy pulls up in like a brand new Audi. And I'm sitting in the front. We rolling in. I've got the window down. We pull into Taksim Square and we pull up at this stoplight. And I look over and there's this little girl like playing a flute and like begging for money. And there's this like railing, right? Like a metal, like kind of tube kind of fence, like to just keep pedestrians out of the street. And she's on the other side of it. And I toss her out like some Turkish lira to like give her some money for food. She sees the money like land in her like flute case thing. She looks at that, looks at me, gets this like demon possessed look in her eyes, scales the fence, hops through my window, and is trying to bite me.
What?
Oh yeah. All my training had not prepared me for this moment. I just froze and I was like, just trying not to get bit. The cab driver, he was ready. He picked up a newspaper and started whacking her in the head. Peels out, she freaking flies out of the window, rolls 3 times, and hops off and takes off running like one of those like World War Z zombies. The slow ones, the fast ones.
The fast ones.
We don't say a word the whole way back. And like I look at the cab driver and he goes, my friend, it is okay. She is Syrian. And I was like, what does that have to do with anything? Anyway, we get to the hotel and we get out. And I'm still kind of in shock. I'm like, I can't believe this happened. My buddy comes up to me and he's like, bro, you almost became the first zombie.
That's amazing.
That is awesome. I'm so glad I asked that question at the end.
That's awesome.
That is so great. Well, man, Chad, we can't thank you enough. I mean, I know your schedule's busy but it was everything that we were hoping it would be. And hopefully we'll get you back on here sometime soon. We can talk some more about some of this stuff, but keep doing what you're doing. I mean, it's impressive, like I said. And I think that anytime you're helping the young athletes, the older athletes, I mean, everybody's being helped at this point, but especially those parents too, kind of get, figuring it out. And it sounds like with the new book, what were you talking about there is the failure hack.
I think that's what'll be
another
titled.
Good one.
Yeah. We've actually got a children's book coming out. We're finalizing what the title is, but it's written. We're finishing illustrations right now, but it's basically going to be like Sandlot meets Karate Kid meets Warrior Kid.
Oh, wow.
Right. So it's like really cool. The lessons in my other book told through a novel and a story.
Wow.
So
that's fantastic.
It'll be fun.
I'm picking up the Ultimate Guide to Mental Toughness for my son. So
yeah, so Mental Toughness and Confidence.com, that's still the best place for people to go and check out some of the products there, like Teen Confidence Unlocked and the Young Athlete's Ultimate Guide to Mental Toughness. You can also find that on Amazon as well.
Yeah, you can get it at Mental Toughness and Confidence.com, Amazon, Audible, all those. So I mean, if you buy it, buy it wherever you want. But if you buy it from me, then I sign it and send it to you.
That's awesome. And guys, go to that website. Yeah, there you go. And go to that website because there's lots of really good stuff. Check under the blog section too. There's lots of stuff that Chad puts in there. Man, thank you.
Probably the best free thing you can get. I talked about a little bit, that urgent, important matrix.
Yeah.
So like if you go to my YouTube channel, it's linked on the top of all my videos, but you can go and grab that resource. Like literally, like if you use it once a week, like just use it on Sunday for 10 minutes to plan your week. And this will be the best year you've ever had. Right. And it's a full interactive PDF that shows you how to use it. But it's really, stop wasting time on tasks that are, not urgent and not important, or urgent and not important, and focus on stuff that's, important but not urgent, or urgent and important. Right.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, those are all things that, we talked about that earlier, is the application, right? Not the theory Brandon was talking about. And that is what I like about the content you're putting out there, is these are things people can start applying right away. And so thanks for everything you're doing. We'll continue to follow the journey. And like I say, hopefully we'll get you back on here one day.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.